ALP jobs pledge. Your former colleague in the Labor Party, Jenny George, I think she made some sensible comments this morning. She attacked Anthony Albanese's climate change pledge to create 604,000 new climate jobs. She said it's unbelievable. She's right or not?
Well, absolutely. Good on Jenny George. She knows jobs, former head of the trade union movement in Australia, and she made the basic observation, really. It's so obvious that Labor's relying on a multiplier effect here. For every direct job created, there'll be more than 8 indirect jobs created from building solar farms and wind farms and putting up new transmission wires in remote parts of Australia. Well, no self-respecting economist would believe that. And in fact, the multiplier effect would be closer to 2 or 3 for those sorts of jobs in those kind of locations. So it's a massive inflation of the job numbers. Albanese's been caught out by our former colleague, Jenny George, caught out with her piercing economic analysis. But, you know, Rowan, we know that these so-called new industries, clean energy, don't create many jobs, because you've only got to look at or fly over a solar farm or a wind farm and say, where are all the workers? You can't find any workers.
That's right.
And when Matt Keane in New South Wales produced his net zero 2050 policy, he said, a big drum roll, there'll be 2,400 jobs over 10 years. That's just 240 jobs per annum. And that's just the drop in the bucket compared to the jobs being wiped out. 75,000 jobs, direct and indirect, rely on the coal industry in the Hunter Valley. And Labor's saying they'll be going to 100% renewable energy as quickly as possible, which is obviously a loss of many of those jobs. So the economic data produced by Albanese is not believable. And in net terms, there'll be a loss of jobs because of the coal industry jobs that are wiped out.
Mark, Albanese has come up with a new slogan. I thought modern Labor hated slogans, but anyway, Build Back Stronger. Is this Albo plagiarising Build Back Better, or did he just get it wrong?
Well, I don't know. He's been watching too many sleepy Joe Biden videos, I suppose, or Hillary Clinton. They've all had those slogans, haven't they? So Albanese's not building anything back any better than the fact that we've had reliable baseload power from coal and gas. We should have it from nuclear in Australia as well. And when you run the risk of blackouts, and let's be clear about this, in New South Wales, I mentioned Matt Keane, he acknowledges that the early closure of the coal-fired power stations has put New South Wales at risk of blackouts, and he's petrified of what's happening on that front. So why make it worse for the rest of Australia with Albanese's plan, unless in terms of the energy system you can point to reliable baseload power, then you're condemning the economy to blackouts, and that's an economic catastrophe. Don't worry about climate catastrophe. The real catastrophe here is economic. If you haven't got baseload power, that is 24/7, keeping the lights on.
Absolutely. Now, speaking of lights or bright lights, Yasmin Poole, who I'm sure is a lovely person and a very intelligent lady, she has been named a Rhodes Australia, a Rhodes scholarship, basically, at large. Now, Yasmin says, Mark, that she intends to use the Rhodes Scholarship to study a Master Public Policy and a Master of Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies because, Mark, she wants to create intersectional gender equality which considers gender but also race, class, sexuality and other factors. Is this satire, Mark, or am I missing something?
No, this is the real world at places like ANU, and unfortunately this Rhodes Scholar, so-called. Identity politics is bad and divisive enough, where you subdivide society on the basis of race, gender and sexuality. But this intersectionality theory basically says the 3 of those elements, race, gender and sexuality, can come together and blend into a new theory of equity in our society. Well, there's no such prospect of that happening. The bottom line is opportunity in our society comes from socio-economic factors. It comes from children who are born into low-income families, public housing estates, long-term unemployment, intergenerational unemployment, nothing to do with identity, your skin colour, your sexuality, your gender. They're the real drivers of inequity, and this intersectional analysis is in so many ways flawed. For example, the analysis would say that you can blend gender and sexuality together. But there are so many conflicts. Look at the problem of transgender athletes, people who are male competing as females against women in sport, in football codes and the like. People who are effectively big burly blokes knocking women over, winning the events, weightlifting events, as we saw at the Olympics. Feminists, left-wing feminists, are complaining about this because it diminishes the opportunities of girls and women in their chosen sport because they've got to compete against people who have these massive physical advantages. So that's the reality out there in the real world, and no amount of twisting it under the banner of intersectional analysis will change that reality.
And there's a certain irony, isn't there, to the Rhodes Scholarship, where they're busy tearing down statues of Rhodes who provided the money for it. That's identity politics for you. But, Mark, I know around the Christmas tree at the Latham household there will be some gingerbread, but are you going to do the modern approach, which is a genderbread person? Civil servants in the UK are being given genderbread person presentations to illustrate gender identity, sexual attraction and biological sex as a spectrum of 0 to 100, Mark. And the Telegraph in the UK says this is prompting fears of unscientific nonsense. Surely a gender-bred person is not unscientific nonsense, Mark.
Well, we were told to follow the science. Now apparently we've got to follow the gender-bred person. And if you look at that diagram that you had on the screen, the contradiction, the absurdity really, is that it's your brain that tells you what gender you are or you want to be, and that little drawing there between the legs has got nothing to do with it. Well, I think that in itself illustrates the absurdity of what we're talking about. Gender is much more than who you think you are or what you want to be, or the dreams you have about your gender. It is literally between the legs. There's a biological reality there that no amount of gender-bred manufacturing can ever change. So how ridiculous. And just be careful on what you bite there, I suppose. If you're eating your gingerbread, you've got to be careful, start at the head, I suppose.